Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody, where today we are talking about one signing to fix your club's biggest problem. Coming up on today's show, who should Arsenal sign to fix their Havertz issue?
If you're talking about that player that no one is going to fancy leaving him 1v1 against the Premier League right back, you'd bring him in.
Should Man United sign a goalkeeper or a central midfielder?
If you've got goalkeepers who give away cheap goals like that, it doesn't matter how well you play in a game.
And who is the forward that could fix Villa's goal-scoring problems?
He's lightning quick, really strong on the ball, a powerful runner, skillful, feels like he's developing that end product.
Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. And joining myself and Mikey McCubbin today, we have Rory. Rory Talks Football. Welcome, Rory. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very glad to be here. Excited.
Very good to have you on board. Today, guys, we're talking about one signing to fix your club's biggest problem. And Rory's club got a problem today because it was announced that Kai Havertz has picked up a knee injury. As we record this, it has not been confirmed how long that knee injury will keep him out of action for. But Rory, this is a bit of a nightmare for Arsenal, I think it's fair to say. And does that change where you're going with your signing suggestion for Arsenal?
It is a nightmare. It is an absolute nightmare. It just feels like it's never ending. We got to the end of last season and there was hope going into this season it wouldn't repeat itself. But it's actually made me double down on my signing. I think it's now even more important than it was before that news came out this morning.
And what were you thinking beforehand? Because there was also the news that Trossard's been offered improved terms. Were you looking in that left wing forward area?
Yeah, so in hindsight, I think that Trossard contract maybe makes a little bit more sense now with the Havertz news, because he can play as a centre forward, so keeping him makes sense. But yeah, the option I've gone for is a left winger that can play centrally, so could tick both boxes.
Okay.
Are you ready for?
We're ready.
Just to clarify, Dougie, you're sporting director.
I am
sporting
sporting director. I have
yeah.
ultimate say. So Mikey and Rory are competing for my approval.
Wow.
Rory, take it away.
Ademola Lookman.
Nice.
Bring him back to the Premier League. Has been fantastic at Atalanta. Obviously, previously in the Premier League, had been stuttering a little bit, but he's gone out there, completely found his feet. Looks to be leaving Atalanta. Seems like they've fallen out. More drama like we've seen in many cases this summer where felt like he could have that move to Inter and whatever's going on. But he can play centrally, he can play off the left, he's explosive. Actually, relative to a lot of the left wingers that we've been looking at, his output in terms of goal contributions ranks more highly than pretty much any of them. And I think that's what we really need off that left-hand side. It's the balance, someone that's going to bring goal contributions, take some of that sort of strain off the right-hand side, and really give us someone that, we find it so often where teams really shift to cover off Ødegaard and Saka, and players like Martinelli and Trossard, they get in situations a lot where they're 1v1, and a player like Lookman, there aren't many right-backs in the league that would want to be faced up 1v1 with Lookman, who can go either way, score from kind of anywhere. And so, yeah, going into, even before today, that was an option for me, and now, Rodrigo would be the dream, but I feel like Lookman makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, we were talking with David Ornstein earlier this week on the Sky Mobile Transfer Show, and he said that Rodrigo was mainly pushed kind of by intermediaries who wanted Arsenal to get involved. But I think there was kind of factors in terms of wages and the fee involved there as well, with you looking to strengthen in other areas of the squad, that it didn't really ever feel possible. Briefly, just on another Serie A player, did you ever really dream of someone like Rafa Leao? We've seen a lot of Arsenal fans online bigging him up all summer, really.
Yeah, Leao's always been a strange one because we've never been linked to him. And even with Berta coming in, I think there was some sort of noise about maybe he was interested, but he's such an exciting player to watch. Again, if you're talking about that player that no one is going to fancy leaving him 1v1 against the Premier League right back, you'd bring him in. Can he do the defensive work that Arteta demands? Martinelli, for all of his flaws recently, always puts in that sort of defensive work, did it against United really well. Can Leao do that? Maybe. I feel like a lot of people just assume that he can't and he won't and he can't be trained to do it. But at Milan, he is the star. Everything offensively kind of relies on him. He's given that freedom. So maybe he could do it. But yeah, I prefer Lookman.
Fair enough. I think Lookman also feels more achievable right now if it's getting down to the final couple of the weeks of the window. Gasperini's obviously left there and gone to Roma. They brought in Ivan Juric, who's under huge pressure after really difficult spells at Roma and then Southampton. former Gasperini player, so you'd expect sort of stylistically things to continue. But in recent years, Atalanta have been punching above their weight, I think it's fair to say, in terms of their wage budget as well. Retegui's also left the club already, so maybe that's factored in on why they're kind of really hankering for that top fee for Lookman. But it does feel fairly achievable. I mean, Mikey, you watched Arsenal firsthand taking on your club, Man United, at the weekend. Were you looking in the same area for this signing to fix Arsenal's problem?
Yeah, I think so. I think earlier in the window, I was very keen on Eze going to Arsenal. I think he, covers two bases. He's effectively a big upgrade on someone like Trossard. But, like we're saying, Trossard is very much at Arsenal to stay now. Eze looks to be on his way to Spurs, although who knows, what happens in light of this Havertz news by the time people are watching this. So, yeah, I've gone for the left wing. I've gone for more of an out-and-out winger. And the Havertz news, hasn't shifted me too much, because I just think at this stage of the window, realistically, what backup centre forwards are there? Arsenal do have someone in Mikel Merino who is, at the very least, a plan B centre forward. He did a pretty admirable job last season, put in some big performances in big games, and Arsenal centre forward situation, even with Havertz out, is still more dynamic now than it was last season when it was between Havertz and Merino. Gyökeres and Merino, couldn't be further apart in terms of, what they bring to the role. So I'm not obviously it's a big loss, but it hasn't shifted my thinking. I think that left wing slot still needs to be prioritised. I've gone for a choice here that I don't think is going to be very popular with Arsenal fans. It's a possible move that, it has even split Chelsea fans. But I do think at this late stage of the window, in terms of left wingers with a very high ceiling who are available and for a bargain fee, I do think Alejandro Garnacho is an option. I do think if Arsenal could swoop in and offer, say to Garnacho, Garnacho, if he goes to Arsenal, has got just as much of a chance of being a regular starter as he would do at Chelsea. Arsenal are competing for, more immediately for a title than Chelsea, at least in theory, this season. And I think Mikel Arteta could be an amazing manager for him. Obviously, there is the caveat, given, the behaviour that he showed, in the last few months at Man United. Does Arteta fancy taking that on? The flip side to that is I think joining a group like Arsenal and playing under a manager like Arteta at such a young age could be really, really good for Garnacho's kind of emotional and development and his maturity as a professional footballer. But his potential move to Chelsea split that fan base. I can't imagine it would be a particularly popular move with Arsenal fans. But I just don't think that, in terms of available young left wingers right now, I can't think of really anyone who has the ceiling of Garnacho. This is someone who at 21 years of age has made nearly 100 Premier League appearances. Last year he played, I think, nearly 60 games in total. That kind of experience, you can't just pluck out from anywhere. He has consistently, been one of the most dangerous players in that Man United team. In fact, last year, even in what was a real down year for him, he was posting, better numbers in terms of touches in the opposition box, better than Martinelli, better than Rodrigo, in fact, which is crazy in a Man United team that was, 15th, 44 goals scored. He is as erratic as he can be in terms of his decision making. There aren't very many better players in his age bracket for getting into dangerous positions. So I do think as well, I expect he will be available for around 40 to 50 million pounds. When you compare that to, the prices that we've seen other wingers go for this summer, Noni Madueke, Anthony Elanga,
even something like Amari Hutchinson last week.
Amari Hutchinson for 40 million pounds. And you look at how Garnacho, the numbers that Garnacho produces consistently season on season in a really underperforming team. I just think, he's worth a shot. The away from the pitch stuff is obviously an issue, but I think if you contain that, you've got one of the best young players in the world on your hands. And also, I also still have enough faith in Martinelli that Garnacho comes in, has to fight for his place. He doesn't need to be playing every single week. There doesn't need to be that kind of pressure on him that very quickly came on his shoulders at Man United, where it's suddenly like, oh yeah, you're 18 years old, but you've got to carry this attack. Like, I think at Arsenal, you can manage his time better. You can manage expectations of him better as well. I mean, I don't know what you.
Well, I was going to ask
Rory.
Rory. Let's get some scout on scout conflict.
I think you're right, Arsenal fans. I think are just sick to death of this kind of saviour complex from other clubs, Premier League clubs. It does. I mean, generally, it feels like. It has the feeling of a Nicholas Jackson deadline day loan or a Garnacho or an Nkunku. It does have that feeling. I don't disagree. I think that the ceiling is there for Garnacho. I do think there is a player there that could develop into a top left winger in the Premier League. I do just worry about the people around him, the influence that they have on him, some of the decisions he makes, the social media posts. It's not something that really Arteta takes to. And in fact, when we've had that in the past, those players were moved on very quickly. Even when, even at points where the squad could have done with those players in terms of what they could do on the pitch, it was more a principled thing of getting rid of them. So, yeah, big if in terms of that off-field stuff, the behavioural stuff. If he came in and wasn't the starting player, actually, would he accept that? Would he handle that well? I don't know. So, yeah.
I think there's a lot of question marks about that. Before I reveal my decision on the Arsenal potential Lookman versus Garnacho, I just wanted to ask you about Arsenal's sort of inability so far to offload some of their players, because your net spend this summer is £186 million. It's actually the second most in the Premier League. It's actually considerably more than Liverpool's, despite what everyone thinks about Liverpool's rampant spending this summer. And across the last 5 seasons since 21-22, your net spend is over £300 million more than Liverpool. Do you think that you should have made more concerted effort throughout this summer to get rid of the likes of Kiwior, Zinchenko, Fabio Vieira, players like that?
Yeah, no, 100%. It's probably the most frustrating element of our transfer business at the moment. A lot of it is legacy decisions that Andre Berta's inherited in terms of players that are on wages that they definitely shouldn't have been. Some of those, you look at Zinchenko's wages, to get a player of that quality in at that point in our project, we had to offer those. And I look at some of the offers that have come in. I think Porto offered 23 million for Jakub Kiwior. I think that is unbelievably below his value. And so you're in this position where you let him go for 23 million, and once again you continue to look like you can be bullied in the transfer market, or you hold on to your value, which I think we've done with Trossard, but then you don't make the sales, and it's this difficult balancing act that we've got at the moment, and it may still take another couple of years to get to the point where players aren't on wages that they shouldn't be, and there's a bit of respect for Arsenal in the transfer market.
Okay, the decision needs to be made by the sporting director. I like the Garnacho suggestion in some ways, but I have my doubts about him for Arsenal right now. I almost don't want to be the club that buys Garnacho next. You want to be the one after that, I think. Cause I
the
think
one who buys him after that will be spending
I'd rather
£80
be
million
in that
on him.
position. I just think there's so much to iron out of his game, let alone his attitude. So I'm going with Ademola Lookman, who can cover more centrally as well. So that's 1-0 to Rory. Let's move on to Man United, because we're talking about net spend. Theirs is the highest in the Premier League so far this summer, at £198 million. I mean, before we get into your suggestion, Mikey, because you are 1-0 down, briefly, how much excitement and belief have you taken from that opening weekend performance against Arsenal, admittedly, despite the result?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get ahead of yourself after one performance of the season, but it was a big game against Arsenal at Old Trafford. I know last season United gave a pretty good account of themselves against Arsenal at Old Trafford as well. But I think it's particularly heartening to see a first game of the season and instantly fall in love with two of the biggest signings. I honestly can't remember that having ever happened in the post Sir Alex Ferguson era. Probably didn't even happen in the last 5 years of Fergie, to be honest. To have two players who look like, in theory, to have transformed the attack, and also, even someone like Mason Mount coming in and really, I know we saw him towards the back end of last season, but to see how well he was linking up with Dorgu and Cunha and Mbeumo so quickly in his favoured position was great to see as well.
I thought Luke Shaw as well. So many people have written him off. I thought he played
well
on
as a left
Sunday.
centre back. I mean, it kind of has to. I think if he's going to have a future, like that's got to be his position, doesn't it? Like, I think the less the less running he has to do, the better. So left centre back makes a lot of sense for him in terms of his distribution, in terms of his defensive awareness. So yeah, it's positive for United. But I was saying to Rory off camera, my one worry in terms of the outfield, at least, because obviously goalkeeper is a big worry too. Arsenal, I think Arsenal, there's a lot of chat about Arsenal having an off day. The defence definitely didn't have an off day. Raya and Saliba and Gabriel was still incredibly solid, and the attacks still caused United some problems. But I think Zubamendi didn't have his best first game in the Premier League.
Since come out that he was ill in the week.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense because he looked a bit panicked in the first 10 minutes and grew into the game a bit, but certainly wasn't at his best. Arsenal's midfield had a real off day, and I wonder what Man United's midfield looks like when they're playing against one of the best midfields in the league, not having an off day, or even Fulham this weekend. I wonder what that's going to look like. So that's still a question mark. But I said before the season that whatever happens, we're going to be fun to watch, and we were really fun to watch. Kiwior and Burma were a joy to watch. So yeah, pretty positive. But I guess I may as well just get onto my suggestion. It has to be a goalkeeper or a central midfielder. I was really torn between the two. I think long-term central midfield, as it always has been with United, is a big issue, and our ability to play the way that we did against Arsenal on a consistent basis is going to require really physical midfielders who can win those second balls and can drive through the space when needed as well, and can be super mobile to sweep up attacks too before they start. Obviously, Baleba was the dream. That's not happening now. Hopefully, it can happen next summer.
Does it worry you? I mean, it always felt like a dream for this summer, but does it worry you that next summer maybe a Liverpool's involved?
For sure. But I guess that's what's good about United getting in there a little bit early. If they've made contact with the player and the player's keen on the move already, then that gives them a little bit of an advantage. Obviously, a transfer can always be hijacked, but it's good that United are doing the groundwork already. But I have gone for goalkeeper just because that feels like the more immediate position where there can be a quick fix. I just don't know. I couldn't find a midfielder who's going to quickly fix United's midfield this season. So that might just have to be something that we deal with before next summer. I've gone for a bit of an obvious shout. Gianluigi Donnarumma still on the market. Obviously, it looks more likely that he's going to go to Man City, but at Man City, he is going to have to compete with James Trafford, who's moved back there for big money. Pep Guardiola isn't going to just give him the number one spot, especially given that James Trafford is probably better ball playing goalkeeper as well. And at United, he just fixes the problems that they currently have. Brilliant at claiming crosses, albeit not on the level of someone like Raya, but who is. But certainly, a more conventional and better shot stopper than Andre Onana and Bayindir. Super tall, super experienced, has thrived in big moments throughout his career. There's not an awful lot to say about him other than that, to be honest. We don't really need to go into his numbers that much. Obviously, he lacks in terms of the ball playing side of things. But I think, as we saw on the weekend, United are not going to be playing, building up slowly out of the back this season. It feels like there's going to be a lot more long balls into the centre forwards, winning second balls. Onana and Bayindir are probably slightly better at that, but I don't think that's something that Donnarumma is going to be terrible at. I don't think that's something where he lacks horribly in his game. So yeah, I think in terms of a quick fix, that's it. Because as we saw last season, as we saw against Arsenal on the opening day, ultimately, if you've got goalkeepers who are going to, give away cheap goals like that from set pieces, which more and more teams play for now, because more and more teams are good at taking them and good at taking up the opportunities that arise from them. It doesn't matter how well you play in a game; you're always going to have a disadvantage.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the fact he's available feels absolutely massive. That just feels like the big benefit. I think as a shot stopper, there's very few that rival him in Europe. I actually don't necessarily agree about his cross-claiming. I think that can be a little bit poor. and his distribution's obviously not great. But
I think his cross claiming is around 5% of crosses into the box, which is around what Alisson manages. Raya's up at like 12%, which is just that is just freakish. Like, he's probably one of the best of our lifetime at that. And yeah, I mean, I suggested Mike Maignan for United a couple of weeks ago as well, but I just don't think he's anywhere near as gettable now. It's like start of the season now. So,
and Rory, I mean, you saw firsthand Donnarumma against you guys last year in the Champions League. Don't need to be reminded of that save from Odegaard. What a phenomenal save. Rory, were you going for goalkeeper as well? Were you going for a different position for United?
Again, toss up of the two. I do think they do need a goalkeeper. Obviously, you can look at that game against United at the weekend and say, it was the difference of the two goalkeepers. Raya, I think, in one really similar situation, punches instead of flapping, and that's the difference. But yeah, the Donnarumma one, I don't know. I find him such a strange goalkeeper to analyse, because I feel like more often than not, I look at him and go, you can get at him, really, and he's not that strong on crosses. But then in the two kind of biggest games almost of the last decade for me, with England and with Arsenal, he's been superhuman. So no, I definitely hear it. I've settled on the midfield. I did think Baleba was absolutely perfect. I think I made a video before the Sesko deal happened saying I really think they'd be better off going for Baleba before Sesko. And I think I was kind of vindicated in that game at the weekend, where I thought Mason Mount playing centrally did really well. I think Bruno Fernandes could do the same thing. You've got Xerxes. So I would have focused more on that midfield, which is what I've done. I've gone for Morten Hjulmand at Sporting, which it always feels cheap going for a player's former manager's new team, because that's just an easy link to make. But I think Amorim's system, it's not unique in a sense, but it is unusual. And I do think certain types fit it really well. And I think what he's doing at United, particularly on the right-hand side, which is where Hjulmand would fit in as a right central midfielder, I feel like he can pretty much build what he had at Sporting with that addition, with Ahmad as a right wing-back, a left-footed right wing-back who's more of a winger, kind of did it with Quenda at Sporting, with Mbuemo, with Yoro behind, who I think is absolutely sensational. I feel like he can get to the point with that right-hand side where you bring Hjulmand in. He's got the legs. I think he's got the physicality to deal with the Premier League. His range of passing is really, really solid. Retention of the ball's really good. And so I just feel like, I don't know how much he'd cost, maybe 40, 50. Sporting would probably want more. But if that's calling him a stopgap is offensive, but if that's your kind of bridge now to then Baleba perhaps next summer, I just think, he's a player that could come in, knows the system, doesn't need to wait, adapt to it. Obviously, they've had a good summer, I think, in terms of really getting up to speed much more with what Amorim wants to do. And he's got an Arsenal tattoo on his shoulder, so that's just something I can hang over our United fans' heads if it happens.
A nice benefit there, for sure. I mean, quickly before I do the reveal as well, we've seen some wild predictions for where United are going to finish this year. I've seen people go 10th, I've seen people go 4th. Where did you have them in your predictions, and has that changed after the weekend?
It probably has changed. I had them 9th, with the caveat that if they bought in Baleba, that could go up to as high as 5th. I think probably 6th or 7th would be fair based on the way that they played. I was really impressed with the way that they played against us. I think it's easy to say, Arsenal had an off day, and Arsenal in many parts were forced into having a bit of an off day. We were put under a lot of pressure. So yeah, I think 6th or 7th, and I think that'd be good for United.
Absolutely, I think they definitely take that after the disaster of last year. This is much, much harder than Garnacho versus Lookman for me. I think I can see the benefits of both. Hjulmand having played, Manuel Ugarte had also played under Ruben Amorim, and that hasn't gone so well. But the fact he, feels like he's arriving in a better moment, he hasn't just had a year sort of being phased out by PSG. I really like that. But then Donnarumma potentially feels like the quicker instant fix. My thing with Donnarumma is, I don't know whether you get a buyer for either Onana or Bayindir right now.
You have, I think United basically have to.
Yeah, so again, it doesn't feel very feasible, but I think right now I prefer the Donnarumma move. But I think both would be really good additions for Man United. So let's call that 1-1. Right, let's move on to Aston Villa. Now, Aston Villa, it's been widely publicised having huge PSR issues. They've made a net profit of over £15 million this summer. Only Wolves, Brighton and Bournemouth have made more money on transfers this summer. They've had to let go of Jacob Ramsey. We saw the reaction of Tyrone Mings saying there's more going on behind the scenes. We saw the reaction of John McGinn basically calling out PSR as a concept. Basically, that's not going to change in the next 2 weeks, if at all. So Villa need to potentially strengthen in a few areas. They also had a really disappointing performance, I thought, against Newcastle at the weekend. First game of the season at home. And I think they created 0.3 XG, which was the lowest in the Premier League.
Didn't
on the
have a shot
opening
in the
weekend.
first half.
It was a pretty drab game for sure. So I'm intrigued about where you're going to go. Rory, it's now 1-1. You lost the last round. Where are you going for Villa?
Yeah, I've gone for the wing. It's bizarre the way that I understand the issues that they've had in terms of the business that they've done and the wage structure they created. It became a massive problem, but the direction they've gone since when I think they were at their best, which was 23-24, qualified for the Champions League, they were so attacking and they had real width with wingers. And in a lot of games, they were playing with kind of Rodgers and Diaby and Bailey and Watkins. And then you see them against Newcastle. And all right, in those sorts of games, Emery does tend to change. But even then, in that season, it would be Bailey, Diaby, Watkins. Yeah, had kind of John McGinn almost as a wide right player with Tielemans and Kamara and Onana and just Morgan Rodgers and Watkins. And I just don't get it. And Bailey, it seems, is going to Roma on loan, having extended his contract last year and given him a pay rise, which again just doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But I do think going back to having some of that width to provide Ollie Watkins would be far better for them. I don't think they need to be as kind of turgid as they were against Newcastle. So I've gone for Abdul Fatawu from Leicester, who has obviously been linked to Sunderland, which I think would be a great move for them as well. But I don't know what the finances are like if they can pull it off. Seems like it's about 30 million, but I just think he's electric. He's lightning quick, really strong on the ball, a powerful runner, skillful, feels like he's developing that end product. Left-footed, which I don't think they've got another. Samuel Eiling Jr., but outside of that, I don't think they've got another left-footed forward player. Donyell Marlin, who I'm not a huge fan of, right-footed anyway. So yeah, I think you bring him in off the right-hand side. You can play Rodgers off the left, Watkins through the middle. Like I said, yeah, his end product. I mean, that goal he scored against Fiorentina in pre-season, delightful finish, cutting in off the left. I just think that would bring excitement, flair. And if you look at that performance against Newcastle, it was kind of crying out for someone that could do that.
I think that's a really excellent suggestion. I don't know whether Sunderland have the finances right now, although I have kind of said that all summer without letting go of a few players, which will surely happen. We've got a squad of about 45 right now. But you look at Talby's performance in the opening game against West Ham as well. I think there is talk about us going for a winger and a striker as well. But I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. We've definitely had a crazy summer. But Fatawu for Aston Villa, given how well he performed last year for Leicester before getting injured, feels like a nice suggestion. And also watch out for Evan Guessin as well, who was really impressive at Nice last year, can play all across the forward line. But I'm totally with you, Rory, and I'd be surprised if Mikey hasn't gone there as well, because with Asensio, doesn't look like that's going to be... He's going to be brought back. There was whispers of that, but it's not really going anywhere. Rashford's obviously not been signed. John Duran left in January. So, Mikey, did you also go down the forward route for Emery's
very
men?
much so, yeah. And I've got, as well, I've gone for someone who, is a bit versatile, but very much a winger. Like, Villa, last season as well. I completely agree. I think lacked width. And made it work for sure. But like trying to do that again this season, I think you just waste Morgan Rodgers a bit. I want to see him every game in the centre, completely pulling the strings of that attack. And if you put him on the left, that limits that. And ultimately, Jacob Ramsey, in terms of someone who was so industrious, could again fill in multiple kind of roles, but really was a stalwart on the left for them last season. His loss is massive, and I think they got a really good fee from Newcastle for him. Obviously, that will go down as pure profit. So, in theory, I don't know the ins and outs of their financial situation on this exact day, but I do think that Villa certainly deserve to go for a punchy target in the forward line. And I've gone for a left winger, but he can also play on the right. He's very two-footed, and someone who's been linked with much bigger clubs this summer. Nothing's come of it so far, and that's Malick Fofana at Lyon. Now, Fatawu almost certainly is a more realistic target. I think Malick Fofana would be a real coup, but we've seen Villa pull this off in the past with the likes of Diaby, even John Duran as well. So I do feel like, maybe it's a possibility, maybe it's not, but I just think he would really take that Villa left side to a new level. I just think his dribbling ability in tight spaces, like I said, two-footed, a bit like Fatawu as well, that end product is really coming. I think it was 5 goals and 4 assists for Leon in relatively limited game time last year. And yeah, could play on the right if needs be. I do worry now with Leon Bailey having gone to Roma. That was only announced this morning. How much balance there is in that attack at all. I think, they're going to have to rely on Marlon as a right-sided forward. I do still back Villa to finish in the top 6 because I think, aside from Ramsey, obviously Bailey going as well, but wasn't as big a figure last year. That they haven't sold any major players. Keeping hold of Ollie Watkins is big for their prospects this season if he can stay fit. So, I'm not like... I haven't got like alarm bells going. I imagine if I was a Villa fan, I would feel differently. I would probably be a bit more scared. But I do think they need to make at least one fairly significant signing in the next couple of weeks. And someone like Malick Fofana, I think, would, just give a huge boost to the whole club. And especially given, no big club has managed to get their hands on him so far this season. You think of Bayern Munich, linked with him, ended up going for Luis Diaz among, a ton of other targets. Arsenal and Chelsea linked with him earlier in the summer, even Liverpool linked with him earlier in the summer. From a player's perspective, do you then go to Aston Villa? Because, he does want to play Champions League football, but I think if you look at what Villa did last season in terms of challenging for a Champions League place, only missing out on goal difference, and making the Champions League quarterfinals, I back them to have a very strong Europa League campaign this year as well. I do still think that's a really good career move for him. It might be just a little bit too ambitious, but I think he'd be a great fit there.
I get what you mean for sure. It definitely doesn't feel like Aston Villa is like a significant step down from those clubs in terms of long-term futures for now. I mean, he's still so young, and it feels like the Premier League has a very decent chance of having 5 Champions League spots from now on. I know we missed out the year before last, but you look at the spending in the Premier League compared to the rest of Europe, it's more than the rest combined. You back Man City, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool to all go pretty deep in the Champions League. Same with Newcastle, potentially as well. Villa going deep in the Europa League. They're just going to hoover up a lot of those points, and it'll probably be 5 Champions League spots from now on. So Malick Fofana probably has the potential to compete for Champions League football every year and maybe play a couple in the next 2. I do agree with you that Fatawu feels more realistic, but Malick Fofana potentially the more sort of breathtaking addition. So if they could do it, I'm going to go with Malick Fofana, but Fatawu I think is a really nice suggestion as well. So that's 2-1 to Mikey, but there are 2 to go. So Rory could pull it back. We're next going to go to West Ham, who had a shocker at the weekend, at least a shocking result. I was watching it, and they had a 10-minute spell against Sunderland where they were pretty unlucky not to score. Sunderland scored 2 absolutely phenomenal headers. I think the scoreline slightly flattered us, but I'm not taking it away from the boys. We were amazing, and it will live with me forever, being top of the Premier League for a couple of hours, as sad as that sounds. But West Ham, major work to do. Rory, I think you could go for a number of different positions, but where are you thinking for West Ham?
Yeah, I was looking at that squad, that lineup from the weekend. It's more holes than a sieve to fill, but I've settled on the defence. Obviously, it looks like they're moving, or they're going to be playing in a back 5. That seems to be where they're going. They've only got 4 centre-backs at the club, 3 of which I don't think are probably good enough, which is a problem. So I've gone for Jakub Kiwior, which he may be unavailable within the next couple of days, being linked to Porto. But they've got their only backup centre-back to the 3 that started is Mavropanos, who's definitely more of a right-sided player. Jakub Kiwior, a left-sided centre-back in a back 3 for Poland. I think he really kind of suits a back 3, left-sided centre-back, more so almost than in a back 2, which he's done for Arsenal. It seems like he's going to be relatively cheap. Obviously, I think West Ham have had some issues financially this summer. And I think if you're just trying to kind of, from the defensive perspective, keep goals out, he proved himself at the highest level against Real Madrid earlier this summer. And I think they've got to rely on Jarrod Bowen so heavily that his ability to ping long-range diagonal balls over into Jarrod Bowen, I think, could be a real weapon for them. Equally, I really actually like Malik Diouf on that left-hand side, playing balls into him as well. His range of passing, I think, could be really useful. He's got the Premier League experience. He's developed alongside probably the best centre-back pairing in the Premier League. And from what I see, I think he's going to be an absolute bargain. So if they could hijack that from Porto. The other position I was looking at was central midfield, because I thought, again, against you, their central midfield was
lack of legs.
Massively. But they do have 2 or 3 youngsters that I think they may end up just giving the reins to in midfield this season. So yeah, I've gone for
What would you accept for Jakob Kiwior as a club? You said 24. Was it 24?
I think
Felt a bit low.
We rejected 23 from Porto, which was basically what we paid for him. And you think he's had 2.5 years, like I said, developing, proving himself that he can play at that level. I would take 30 at this point, given, like we said, how Arsenal have struggled to sell. So yeah, and I think 30 million for a player like him is unbelievable.
Mikey, you're up against it. I thought that was an excellent pitch and a great suggestion. Who are you going for West Ham?
Yeah, I've gone for a centre-back as well. Like, it is, looking at their centre-back options, it is... Well, I mean, I do back, someone like Aguerd, someone like Tebow to grow into this team under Graham Potter, especially in a back three. I do back them, but nevertheless, like, Aguerd's coming back from a loan at Sociedad. He wasn't in the squad towards the end of last season. Tebow obviously had a really tough first season in the Premier League. Mavropanos did as well. So I think I say Mavropanos' first season, but back at West Ham. So I do think that centre back is imperative. And like midfield, at least they have other options. At least if they need more physicality, they've got someone like Thomas Souček still at the club, Edson Alvarez as well. I think they were just super lightweight in midfield against Sunderland. I think Potter just got it wrong in terms of his team selection there. I've gone for Taylor Harwood-Bellis from Southampton. I'm really surprised that a big move didn't come in for him this summer. I know Southampton have been valuing their biggest assets at a big price this summer. They're banking on getting back into the Premier League next year and retaining these talents. Totally fair enough. But I mean, I suggested him for Newcastle at the start of earlier in the window. Obviously they've now gone and got Thiaw from Milan. But I do think someone like Harwood-Bellis, I just think he would suit a lot of managers. I just think his proactiveness, and we talk about the lack of legs in midfield. Someone like Harwood-Bellis is so adept at pushing up into midfield and pressing opposition midfielders, and in a back three and a Graham Potter system, I think that works really, really well. His ability to win possession in the middle third and then kick off attacks, I think would be invaluable to him. I guess the one thing where he doesn't match up to Kiwior is that not as adept at playing on the left side, more of a right-sided player. Anything you might fancy him playing in the centre as well, where Hjulmand's very much got it locked down. But I don't know. He's still really young, very adaptable, and also someone who I think if someone like West Ham don't get him now, then he's destined for a bigger club in the next year or two. And where West Ham have been in terms of their kind of financials over the last few years, I think they could really do with signing a couple of players who they can then move on for big money. Like someone like Kudus. I think they sold at an absolute bargain to Tottenham. I don't think they can afford to do that with other big signings. Whereas Harwood-Bellis, if you get him in now, Graham Potter takes him to a new level. Maybe in 2 years' time, you're looking at someone who could be sold on for 60, 70 million pounds.
Fair enough. Wow, big believer in Taylor Harwood-Bellis. I mean, I am too, but that would be a crazy feat as it stands. I'm quite surprised neither of you suggested a Kudus replacement, actually. And maybe someone like, who would have been perfect for West Ham? Jack Grealish, given the fact he went to Everton on loan. Like, that just felt like such an obvious signing for West Ham. And it never really felt like they were in for him. I wonder whether they could also get involved with sort of Chelsea's bomb squad as well, like Christopher Nkunku from Chelsea, if he gets a run of games, if he finds that Leipzig form. Even, dare I say it, someone like Raheem Sterling, he's going to need to go somewhere. If he could accept a loan move again on reduced wages, I know his Arsenal loan was really, really disappointing, but I just want to see Raheem Sterling get somewhere close to his Man City best before the end of his career. But in terms of those two suggestions, I want an instant fix and an upgrade. I'm going with Jakob Kiwior at the moment, which makes it 2-2 going into the final team, which is Liverpool. Won't be too many times that they're fifth this season. But let's talk about Liverpool. Obviously, a really pleasing win on Friday night in difficult circumstances, with obviously the commemoration of Diogo Jota and Andre's life. They got the job done. It was far from certain. They signed Leoni this week, the Parma centre-back, 6'5". I think he's about 18. He's only played about 14 professional games, but that feels like someone for the future very much so. We don't know what's going to happen with Marc Guehi. We had David Ornstein, as I said earlier on the show earlier this week. He said it was very much still a sort of 50-50 scenario, because Guehi has some concerns about how much game time he's going to get in a World Cup year and where he'll place in that pecking order. So Rory, the floor is yours.
Yeah, it's I actually think with obviously the drama of Isak last night, and it seems like that really isn't likely to happen now. It opened up a secondary slight hole, which I hadn't really factored in when I picked my player, which is a slight lack of senior attacking players at this point. They're going into, well, they've started the season with Ekitike, Salah, Gakpo, and Wirtz, and then obviously you've got Chiesa, may leave, and Gamoa coming through. But that is perhaps a concern. Obviously, Salah going to AFCON as well. But I have gone centre-back because I still think, you've got Van Dijk, you've got a Konate who hasn't been through a season yet without some sort of fair amount of time out with an injury. Gomez, who's really injury-prone, and I'm not truthfully sure he's up to the level. And then obviously Leoni's come in, but an 18-year-old from Serie A, if you end up in a situation where you have to throw him in, week out, that's gone wrong. So really, really boringly, Marc Guehi is the option. There's a reason that Richard Hughes wants him. It just feels like the perfect fit for now and for the future. You're looking at Konate's into the final year of his contract. Doesn't seem like he's willing to renew it. Van Dijk is ageing, and whilst he's doing that like a fine wine, there will come a point where he leaves as well. If you bring in Guehi now as a right-footed centre-back that has spent the majority of the last couple of years playing as a left centre-back, it just ticks every box. Obviously, from Guehi's perspective, it may not tick the box of game time going into a World Cup year. I may be wrong, but I don't look at England's centre-back options at the moment and think, well, if he's not starting for Liverpool week in, week out, he's going to drop out of the squad completely. I don't think that would happen. And I'm surprised that maybe it is linked to holding back the money for Isak if that could happen, that they looked at Guehi at, I think, 30 million and said, we're not willing to go above that. I think, of course, he's got 1 year left, and so you look at it and we go, well, if we could get him for free next year, but I just think, he's a 50, 60 million pound player if he's got a couple of years left. So for me, it's just, it solves any potential issue this season.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I totally agree about your point about the England World Cup squad. I think you play 20, 25 games at Liverpool, you're going on that plane for sure with the lack of options at centre-back. I mean, just quickly, from an Arsenal perspective, if they do sign Guehi, whether they get Isak or not, does that worry you that they do look pretty deep in most areas? I mean, you mentioned maybe some forward, maybe missing one or two there, and maybe back up at sort of central midfield, but otherwise they feel pretty deep everywhere.
Yeah, it feels like a really well assembled squad. I think that the way they've gone about this window has felt, I mean, it was quick at the start of the window, but it's felt really precise. They've nailed every target that they've had other than Isak, which is obviously a very different deal. I think you're watching it from afar going, that's really frustratingly impressive.
Yeah. Fair enough. Right, Mikey, you're up against Marc Guehi to Liverpool.
Yeah, this is a difficult one. This is a really difficult one. I agree with so much of what Rory's saying. Like, I think in terms of his ability to play on both the left and right, the fact that he is now a pretty experienced Premier League captain, despite still being pretty young, has gone to international tournaments now and played out of his skin. Like, there's so much to love about Guehi. So I do feel like I've got to go for someone who is, has got at least as high a ceiling as someone like Guehi, and is a long-term fix. I think that's the thing with Liverpool at the moment. It's like they don't really have a proper weak point. You speak about the attack, but then even then, I think the way that they've recruited this summer has been clever in that they've got someone in Florian Wirtz who, say if Ekitike gets injured and you have to play Gakpo up top, Wirtz can fill in on the left, or Gakpo stays on the left and Wirtz acts as a bit of a false nine, or even just tries to play as a number 9. There are possibilities there, and you have Szoboszlai pushing back into an advanced midfield role where he played out of his skin last season. Like, I think although Liverpool's forward line is currently more lightweight in terms of depth, I think the adaptability has almost, or maybe not increased, because we had Luis Diaz playing admirably in the 9 position last year, but certainly, the versatility of that forward line hasn't gone down too much. Whereas, at centre back, just like one injury could really throw things a bit. I've actually gone for more of an out and out left centre back, just in terms of someone to future proof Van Dijk's position, and that's Lukeba at RB Leipzig. Now, How easy would it be to get him out of RB Leipzig at this stage of the window? Not so sure. They've already sold Sesko, on the way to selling Xavi Simons. You expect as well. Do they do business? Do they sell one of their star assets at this stage of the summer with a new manager in? I don't know, but they do have a great relationship with Liverpool. They've sold Naby Keita to them, Ibrahima Konate, Dominic Szoboszlai as well, the aforementioned. So, a deal potentially, in theory, might be able to be done there. I just think, in terms of his physical attributes, in terms of his ball playing attributes, there aren't really many players who you could say right now at his age, okay, yeah, maybe in 3 or 4 years' time you could fill the boots of someone like Virgil van Dijk. He's also super used to playing. Well, he was brought through at Lyon. So he came through. So anyone who's not super familiar with Lukeba, he came through at Lyon, exactly the same generation as Cherki, Gusto and Barcola. I imagine, if Lyon weren't in the position that they've been in financially in the last few years, what they could have achieved, it's kind of frightening. But the manager who brought him through was Peter Bosz. And, you think about the kind of football that Peter Bosz is famous for, super high pressing, super attacking, often leaving the centre-backs a lot of work to do. You just look at that Liverpool performance on Friday, and that was, it was kind of reminiscent of that. And, if there's, a centre-back who's already used to playing that really kind of rock and roll football and having to, have the recovery place to clear up and have that, awareness even from a young age, then Lukeba is that kind of guy. Van Dijk is that guy still for sure. But I think the amount of different managers he's played under and different kind of styles he's played at such a young age, I think really counts in his favour at 22 years old. I guess the other outstanding kind of young centre-back in that position right now would be William Pacho at PSG, but his ball playing ability hasn't come to the fore just yet. Very much more of a classic centre-back, and I think, in a slot team, your centre-backs need to be good ball players. So yeah, Lukeba, is it possible? Not so sure. Probably more of a long-term fix than someone like Guehi, who could plug in right now. And, if Konate gets injured, he's naturally adept there. But you never know. Maybe Leoni, maybe he's more advanced than we think he is, and he can step into Konate's role. And if he can do that, then someone like Lukeba to back up Van Dijk would be amazing.
Yeah, I think I agree with your final point about how realistic it is. Just because Leipzig, they are a selling club. They develop and sell. That's their model. But they seem to sell 2 per summer, max 2 or 3. This year, it's Šeško and maybe Xavi Simons. There's been Nkunku and Szoboszlai at the same time, Timo Werner. And they'll see Lukeba as a big potential sale in 2026, I would have thought, or 2027. So I just don't know whether they do it in the final couple of weeks of the window, because especially given the fact that if they lose 3 starters and 3 of their best young talents in one summer, they don't have that guarantee of funds next year. They still need to qualify for the Champions League to make it all worthwhile. So I just don't think it's I don't think it's as realistic as Marc Guehi right now. So Rory has come back from 2-1 down to win 3-2. A brilliant performance for his debut on the Lowdown. Thank you so much for watching this week, guys. Let us know what you guys thought about those fixes to your club's problem. Rory, thank you so much for coming on the show. If people have enjoyed watching you on this, which they no doubt have, where can they find your content?
Rory Talks Football on most platforms, or Rory Talks Arsenal. Bit of both.
Love that. He does both, and he does it both very well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. We'll catch you next week. Make sure you go check out that David Ornstein transfer show as well for some, well, I was going to say informed opinion. This has been informed as well, but some journalistic, on the nose information. Go check that out too, and we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.